Hi, everyone. I'm Stacey Gualandi. Welcome to the Women's Eye podcast. On this show, you'll meet fascinating women doing extraordinary things. Now, I know you recognize my guest today. Clarissa Ward is CNN's Chief International Correspondent. From Beirut to Beijing to Baghdad, Clarissa's reporting from the front lines of hot zones around the world has earned her multiple Emmy, Murrow, and Peabody Awards and counting. Where there's conflict, there's Clarissa. But it is the untold stories that inspired her new book, On All Fronts, The Education of a Journalist. And I'm truly excited to have her on the show today. Hi, Clarissa. How are you?
Hi, Stacey. I'm great. I'm so excited to be on with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I thank you. But, you're in London and you have a 2-month-old, I believe. And of course, your older son. But after reading the book, I know that you completely get the whole sleep deprivation thing, but is it different when you have 2 children?
It is. It is. Now I look back and I think, wow, 1 kid was really a walk in the park, but 2 kids is like a trek through the jungle in the Congo. I mean, it's definitely a lot harder. And I'm really fortunate. I have a wonderful nanny and a lot of support from my family. But yes, trying to juggle it all. And now with this new normal of working from home, my kids right now are locked in the basement. And that's not, there are people in the basement with them. They're not
Right, that's
alone.
good.
But they are locked in there. And I'm like, they cannot leave under any circumstances.
Just for these little windows, especially as you're with promoting the book. And, it's funny. I was just kind of jokingly wondering if giving birth to your book, if that was harder than giving birth to your sons.
It's so funny. I do refer to it when I'm emailing people about it. I'm like, oh, I had a baby 2 months ago. His name's Casper. But now my other baby is coming next week, the book, because the book does feel more, honestly, like a labor of love. And I started writing it on my first maternity leave. So 2.5 years ago, just after having my first son. And I, now having given birth to my second son, I'm finally releasing the book. So it's very weirdly tied in with this whole experience of giving birth and those first months after giving birth, which, are super intense.
I can imagine that. New abnormal, which seems to be my go-to line all the time,
Yeah.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty of you and your book, which is so good, everybody's been raving, and I loved it. But I wanted to tell you that you and I had a similar start to our careers. And I freaked out when I read it in the book, but when you said that you were a stand-in for Uma Thurman.
Yes.
I was a stand-in for Molly Ringwald.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool.
So I'm reading this, I'm like, no way. Somebody else who kind of had that sort of a roundabout way into journalism.
So random. Oh my gosh, that's so fun. What movie?
It was the second movie that she did with Andrew McCarthy called Fresh Horses. It was after.
Yes, I am familiar with it.
Oh, that's great stuff.
I'm a big fan of the 80s, so.
Yeah, no, I know. People are sick of me always saying like, oh yeah, Molly Ringwald, but anyway, I just thought that was kind of funny. But like I
love it.
Yeah, your book is fantastic. And you mentioned that you had written the first one during your maternity leave. I don't know if you really had like a maternity leave this year, but it has been crazy for you to work and to have a child during a pandemic.
Yeah.
I don't know how this compares to all of the other things that you have done over the last 15 years of this amazing career.
Yeah.
How has it been?
It's really interesting you say that, because this is a topic that I've actually become kind of passionate about, because I've been thinking a lot about the resilience of women that I've seen in conflict zones and what we can learn from that in this moment, because obviously it looks a little different. We're not talking about violence and bloodshed, but it is a war. In a sense. And there are hundreds of thousands of people dying and millions of people suffering around the world, and it's changing the way we live. And just as we see in conflict zones, women are bearing a lot of the brunt of that at home. disproportionately, all these studies tell us that women are, taking the lion's share of the homeschooling, of the housework, of the cooking, of the cleaning. And that really takes a toll. And not only that, but we live in a society in the US where the modern woman is really told all the time that she needs to be strong and positive and have endless reservoirs of self-belief and be determined. And even if she's not, fake it till you make it, and bounce back and lean in. And it's just exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking a lot about what we can learn from women in conflict zones, and how I've witnessed them cope through difficult and challenging times, obviously of a different violent nature, but still there's lessons that I think transpose. And one of them is that I think we need to let go of a lot of this. We need to have it all together. We need to be perfect. Our makeup needs to look good. We need to have our children, reciting their times tables or their multiplication tables in French by the end of the week with our homeschooling skills. And we need to cook, and the house no, let go of it. Okay. Because actually what true resilience is maybe losing it occasionally.
Yeah.
And, and bowling and having a good cry. And then the next day you get up, you brush your daughter's hair, you make breakfast, and you do it all again. That's what resilience is. Resilience is in small acts of compassion when you are feeling depleted, not in trying to be perfect, not in trying to look perfect, not in trying to project this image constantly that you're so on top of your game, because that's disingenuous, frankly. And I think we can all relate to that right now.
Well, and that's so much in your book, how this, not only you're telling the stories of your career and your job, but also this vulnerability that you allowed yourself to write, the fact that sometimes you just had to have a good cry. I mean, you were dealing with some very, very scary situations. And it was one of my favorite lines in the book. You said, perfect is the enemy of good. And in that case, you were saying, just get the story out.
Yeah.
But that's so true, because there is this sense of this desire for perfection all the time.
Yeah.
Especially for women.
Particularly for women. And this is what kills me about it, is like, we're putting a lot of this pressure on ourselves. And I was talking to someone recently who is in childcare, and she was talking about what she calls nurturing selfishness. And she's like, you just got to let go sometimes of the, like, and I noticed this with my husband recently. We were, looking after our children, but taking a break as well on vacation. And he would just go in the afternoon and like lie in bed and nap and watch his iPad. And I was like, how are you doing this? Because if I'm not working on my book right now and getting all of that organized, I'm feeling like I need to be with one of our children, or I need to go and hang out with my dad for a while and spend some, and it occurred to me that, like, men are really onto something with this. Like, they do what they need to do for themselves. And we shouldn't look down on them for that either, because it is this idea of nurturing selfishness.
It's so much about, and obviously the nature of our show, The Women's Eye, and you talk a lot about the women that you met throughout your journeys. And I just wondering that the frustration that you must have felt when you're going into a lot of these places like Russia specifically, or Syria, when you see how women are treated around the world. And I think it's like a slap in the face, because I know it exists, but you would hope that at some point it changes, but it doesn't. I feel like so much of what you said, there's so much in the old ages or something,
It's hard because it's so different from our normal. But I tell you what always struck me is that you'd be there looking at a woman who was fully covered with only her eyes showing and walking 5 feet behind her husband and not speaking unless she was spoken to or whatever. And you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is terrible, the objectification of women by men in this society. But then they're looking at us with pictures of women in magazines who are starving themselves and putting implants in their breasts and wearing these tiny bikinis with their hair extensions and their fake lips, and they're posing like this. And they're saying, oh my gosh, it's so awful how women are being objectified by men in society. So I think that I always try to keep that in mind a little bit, that, you know, every culture and society has their different perspective on things. At the same time, oh man, it's heartbreaking when you would come across a woman who's so smart and you're thinking, wow, you should really be going to college and taking the world by storm and not being married off at the age of 15 to your second cousin who you don't love, and, you know, spending your life looking after your children, which, by the way, is a perfectly dignified and noble thing to do. And I think we have a real problem in our culture with the way we look down on stay-at-home moms, when we should in fact be celebrating them, because as we're now all learning and realizing it's the hardest job there is,
exactly,
and the most selfless job there is. So yeah, you learn to bite your tongue, and you learn to also look at your own culture and your own societal norms a little differently, and more objectively maybe too.
You know, if not for 9/11, you might not have ever found your calling.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
in the 15 year, or no, oh my goodness, 19 years, do you feel that, yes, that you have, I guess, tell me what somebody in your book you wrote, that somebody asked you, what's the juice for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what was that initial juice for you? And do you feel like you have, you know, bridged that communication gap?
So I think the initial appeal, I mean, like, I think every American, 9/11 was like a thunderbolt from the sky, and your world was turned upside down, and it never really went back to normal. You know, you find a new normal, but it's different than the old normal. And I'm always struck by that when I meet young people who were born after, I'm like, you never lived in a pre 9/11 world. That is so wild to me.
Mm-hmm.
But it was almost immediate. I felt like I need to be more engaged with the world. I need to go out and understand what the hell is going on, why these people want to kill us, why we have been misunderstood, or have we been misunderstood? Have we done something to precipitate this? What is our role? And these are all questions that I found myself asking, and I felt compelled to go and start telling these stories, and really to try to tell them in a way where there was a human element to it, because it's so easy when you get into the geopolitical jargon and you're talking about things to lose sight of the fact that you're talking about lives, you're talking about people, you're talking about human beings who, even though they may be from the other side of the world and have a completely different value system and different cultural norms to us, they're people. They laugh, they cry, they have favorite colors, they have foods that they don't like. And, you know, I wanted some element of that to be back in the discourse, so that we didn't resort to this mutual dehumanization of each other. Mm-hmm. And, you know, of course I was 22 years old, or, you know, 21 actually at the time. And
you still
there was a lot of hubris at play. And oh my gosh, yeah, that's like, I got some good lighting here. And you learn a lot along the way, and you realize that you can't change the world. And then later on, you make peace with the fact that you're not actually supposed to change the world. You're supposed to just do your part. And for me, that's shining a light on spots in the world and telling people stories who maybe wouldn't have an opportunity to tell their stories otherwise.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I wrote down so many the stories of these people that you met along the way, who were drivers, tutors, fixers, you know, like I'm kind of ruin their names, but Ayman or Hakim or Waladia, Abu Ibrahim, and of course, Austin. I mean, these are amazing people that I want everyone to read about, but how important is it for you to tell those stories of those people?
It's so important, because here's the thing. When you watch my stories on the evening news, you're getting, you know, half the picture, right? You're seeing, okay, this is what's going on. This is who's fighting who. This is what happened today. And occasionally there'll be, there'll also obviously be civilians in it, and you'll get a feel for suffering and war and all, and the drama and the sadness and the horror and all that. But what you don't get a feel for are the much more subtle interactions going on behind the camera, the acts of small kindness from countless people, the moments of hilarity, the moments of tears, the acts of cruelty, the acts of kindness. These small things, the conversations with drivers, the small moments that of course don't make it to the evening news because they're not up here, but they are actually, in fact, what informs and shapes a journalist's opinion and understanding of a story and of a people and of a place. And because they don't make it to the evening news, I do feel it's so important that they need to make it somewhere. Their stories need to be told somewhere, because it comes back to that humanizing effect again that I was talking about. Like when you read the book, I think maybe for some people who don't necessarily feel super connected to everyday news, that's when you feel the horror of Syria in some ways, not in the worst gassing attack that happened, but in like one person's dreams that were crushed. Something so small as that, but it says so much.
Yeah, I felt like I was there with you, when you were, especially chapter 8, that just gutted me, because it's all about this, covering the what was happening in Syria and witnessing loss of life for people who were like literally so close to you. I mean, this is one thing that was so good about telling someone's story and reporting. It made you better at your job to be immersed in someone else's suffering, to take it in without flinching, without turning away. So I imagine, I imagine. Ooh.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
That's my mother trying to FaceTime me. I rejected her.
Oh my God. I feel like I know your mom too.
Yeah, I know. She's sort of like the secret star of the book.
No, she's hilarious. She needs her own show, right?
Yeah, sure.
But she did tell you to trust your instincts, so I think that's a good thing too. But
yeah.
But no, just in terms of where you felt like it made you do your job better, that you felt like you could understand what was happening better if you could feel someone else's suffering. Is that, how is it that, because I don't know how you can compartmentalize, how you can switch off that.
It's hard. It's really hard. And, some journalists go about it in a very different way. And I don't like to make generalizations about men and women, but I do think I've been talking recently that I think more mothers should be covering war. And I'm sure that it will sound completely insane to a lot of people. But what I'm trying to get at is that there's a difference in terms of how some people emotionally take in other people's trauma, other people's suffering. And you have to find that balance, right? You can't take it all in, because then you are not able to function any longer. And I started to find that with Syria. It was becoming kind of an unsustainable level of taking it in as much as I wanted to. But I do think, it's this blessing and this curse, right? This constant push-pull, because the better my work was in Syria, the more I was involved and immersed. And the more if I tried to pull away, I could feel the work was not then at that high standard. So in order to get the work to that place where it's so compelling, where it's so compassionate, where it's so full and rich, you do, I think, have to give of yourself emotionally. And that's difficult, and it's not always sustainable. And I think, as I said, other journalists have different ways of achieving greatness in their work. But for me, I need to be immersed and open to another person's full experience in order for the piece to really, really, I think, make that punching impact.
Yeah, because you've worked with so many amazing producers and reporters who were
Yeah.
mentors, but also colleagues as well. But is that, do you think, what sets you apart and perhaps has led to so much success in your career? Do you think?
I think there's a couple of things. I think that I've always been obsessed with the idea of getting to places that other people can't get to.
The
So
challenge of it, right? I mean, it's like,
yeah, the
I'm gonna
challenge of
get it.
it. And it's, in order to do that kind of work, to interview ISIS fighters, to go and embed with the Taliban, you really need to spend an awful lot of time building up trust and relationships with people who, frankly, you would not normally choose to go for a coffee with. And, I'm being a little glib there, but the point being, a lot of journalists are just understandably not willing to invest that time in characters who are, frankly enraging and often deplorable. But I just have really felt that it's important to hear every side of the story, and it's important to listen, even if we don't necessarily agree. Well, clearly in the case of an ISIS terrorist, we don't agree at all with what they're doing, but I'm more interested in the journey. How did you get there? How did you become this person, especially for Western jihadis? This is why I became so fascinated with this topic. Why? What made you do this? And that's so important for us to learn from that. This isn't about a gratuitous platform for some ISIS guy to just mouth off about how he wants to kill people in the West. Forget that. I'm not interested in that at all. But man, I do want to hear how you went from being a sort of normal kid in Amsterdam, smoking weed with your buddies, to like a lunatic who's ready to cut someone's head off. Like,
Yeah,
what?
that was, how do you,
Israfil.
Israfil. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, just as you were saying that, yeah, because you saw this sort of arc
Arc.
of how you never would have thought he was going to go there, but it is fascinating though, how this transformation from somebody living where he lived and what he was exposed to.
No, and I think that's what really interests me. So I think that maybe sets me aside. And I think the other thing is that, the same reason I tried to learn a lot of languages, and I should stress, I speak them all at very, humble levels. But for me, I really thrive on connection. That is the juice for me. Coming back to that phrase again, that's what this is all about for me. That's why I couldn't really see myself hosting a show in the studio. I need to be out there. I need to be connecting with people. And then once I connect with them, I can tell you guys, here's what this is about.
Yeah. That's amazing though, that skill that you have to be able to learn and retain so many languages. That's just incredible. Like, I can speak a little French, but I don't know how, that is a whole nother story, how you've done that, but I'm sure that is a total advantage for you too, because
it is in the sense that it just opens the door a little bit. It lets down the guard a tiny bit. Yeah. And even if, you don't have to speak it really well, you just have to be able to chat with them for 5 minutes in their language and show that you've made that effort. And by the way, it also opens up the culture to you, the language, because you start to understand little details about how, languages are so rich. They tell us so much about a people and a place.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of the story that you did, the Russian troll farm, how you literally just walked right up to that guy and,
oh yeah,
all of it and speaking Russian. And I was like, oh my God. I said, that's
no. And that was great because you know what? That's the reason, because I went up and started speaking Russian to him with total confidence. He answered me in Russian. If I had gone up to him and started speaking to him in English and, then he might have, but he answered in Russian. So I knew immediately that he spoke Russian.
Now, I have to ask you, because somebody might look at you and think, oh, she's maybe not so tough or something, or I don't know. I mean, that's how I think women get perceived of that. But you've put yourself in so many scenarios where very life-threatening. At least 3 or 4 that I can think that you wrote about in the book. But do you have fear? Are you with?
Oh, I'm absolutely. Honestly, I am really a fearful person.
Huh.
I'm actually a little bit of a chicken. And I know that sounds ridiculous. You're like, come on. I'm not tough. I freak out when bombs are falling, well, I don't freak out because you actually can't freak out.
Yeah.
If you're a freak out person, you
You're
need
in the
to
wrong
find a different profession. Yeah. I freak out deep in here, but on the outside, all you see is like I just kind of shut down a bit. You know, I spend so much time trying to ensure that I don't put myself in situations where bullets are whizzing past my head, because I'm not interested in that. It doesn't do it for me. And I think there are people who are much better at doing that and are much better at sort of commentating on the military side of things, which is not
that has happened to you.
Expertise. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to be as close to the action as I need to be to get to where civilians are. And those are the voices I'm most interested in hearing, usually in conflict zones. Because commanders tend to just lie on all sides. And of course you have to cover it. I'm not saying you don't, but I don't thrive off of adrenaline. I really find it very stressful. So I am very mindful of going to the places I need to go to and trying to get the shot I need to get, but no interest in taking any gratuitous risks. And I spend months going over security plans and consulting with security consultants and on and on and on. I really am very, very, very serious about security, which sounds weird because you're like, oh, but didn't you embed with the Taliban? But I promise I did it in a very sensible way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it takes months. This isn't something that
it takes months.
Up overnight. Like, oh, let's go to the Taliban tomorrow. You know, talking about with the security and that. So clearly you are not someone who's going to be like, you know, I'm done with reporting because I'm now a mom. You are, you know, straightforward. You're going to keep right on doing what you're doing. But what changes now that you've got 2 kids?
Yeah. So I tell you what changes. I mean, obviously you're even more mindful of security, right? Because it's not just about you anymore. I now have 2 people in my life who I love way more than I love myself, which is petrifying. And the bar is high, right? So it's like, I need to come back from this assignment in one piece. And I'm very, very mindful of that. But the thing that you don't necessarily plan for is how it will change you emotionally. And I remember going when I was 6 or 7 months pregnant to Yemen, and I was interviewing this woman, and her son was on the floor between us, and he was severely malnourished. He was dying. And I reached out and touched his hair, just like, I don't know, just an act of affection. And I felt like his warm body under my hand, and I just lost it. I totally lost it. I couldn't stop crying because of like the horror of the fact that this little boy was dying on the floor, and the whole world might know about it through my report, or, you know, hundreds of thousands of people might know about it through my report, but nothing would change. And the world would keep turning, and it just was, I just was consumed by the agony of it. And let's be clear, I've seen children dying in war zones before. It's always awful. It's always unpleasant. But since becoming a mother, I am now, it's like wearing your heart outside of your body. And I am so sensitive, so exquisitely tender, in a sense, to any act of cruelty or suffering in a child, that and it's extremely emotional. So I feel like what that's done, other than, you know, embarrass me on a few occasions, because I'm like, I shouldn't be the one crying when your son is the one who is sick, and I'm really sorry for that, and it's not really very professional of me. But what it's done is, I think, to inject more compassion into my reporting.
Yeah, even more so. Yeah.
And I feel like we need that. That's what comes back to this idea of mothers covering war, and you know, frankly, mothers running the world, because we need more of that. I'm not saying it needs to be the only thing, but we're in this exciting moment where we're really focused on having a greater diversity of voices out there. and of greater diversity of approaches. And I really think that women and mothers need to be a part of that as well, because I do think it's changed the way I report in a sense. And I do think that I can bring an added something, because I just feel everything that much more intensely. Now, that doesn't mean that women who aren't mothers aren't fantastic reporters, or men who aren't parents or whatever. It's just, it's a little different. So I think it's nice to have the diversity.
Yeah. It's just that it's that new dimension to you.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
it just makes your compassion even deeper than before. But it's interesting. You mentioned about, women and being in these certain positions, but like, do you feel like perhaps maybe we should start thinking about more women leaders in terms of, not to get all political, but I'm just thinking a lot of these countries that seem to have dealt with the pandemic, were female leaders.
I know.
The statistics or the facts on that are pretty laid out.
No, and I saw this like incredible series. It was like a slideshow of photographs. And they're from things like the G20 and the Houses of Parliament in the UK. And
yeah, just saw you
various
today. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then what they do is they show the full photo, and then they take out all the men for the photo, and wow, for all that we think we have made so much progress and we are so on top of this whole thing, you look at these rooms and there's like one or two women in them.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on.
I just feel like
there's
it's
no
a better
question.
planet.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So no, definitely we need more.
In looking at having Russia, I think is still a very much a place in your heart. I think, or has a place in your heart. And you've been with Syria. You've seen the result of dictators. Do you feel that that's are we heading more and more in that direction? This sort of nationalist. I mean, how are you feeling about what's happening in the world? That's a loaded question.
Yeah, no, I'd be honest with you. I'm disturbed, and I'm disturbed primarily, honestly, by a lot of what I see happening in America. And for a number of reasons, partly because I've covered war for a long time now, and I know how it starts. It starts with something as simple as name calling, and then it becomes dehumanization, using terms to describe the other that sort of take away any real human identity to them and just cast them as, you are this thing, right? So whether it's a terrorist or you are a criminal or whatever it might be, we find words that dehumanize the other. And I see how quickly that is a slippery slope that can devolve into armed conflict. And look, in America, we're seeing violence already. Like, it's happening.
This might be the next war zone for you.
And that has not escaped me. And it saddens me. And I know it saddens so many people around the world who look to America, with all of its faults and complexities, but still who look to America as a leader.
Yeah.
And as a kind of pinnacle for, what a great society can look like. So it's very disturbing to me. It's very saddening to me. And I can only hope that we're going to embark on a sort of painful process of trying to heal and to listen to each other more. And we're not there yet. And there are too many forces in the country right now that I think are kind of fomenting division. As opposed to trying to embark on that healing. So, but yeah, I mean, it's really scary to me to see the difference in America today and the America that I grew up in, which, still had a lot of problems, a lot of baggage and all the rest of it. No one's saying anything other than that. But now it's ugly.
Yeah.
It's saddening.
And with so much in the news every single day, I mean, it's nonstop. But do you feel, is there some story that you feel is still being so underreported?
Oh, yeah. I mean, so many stories. Yeah. And I get it, because what's happening in America right now is so shocking and saddening and stressful. And like, I get it. Americans, like, this is where their focus is, and it makes perfect sense. And and they want to right the ship, and that makes, you know, absolutely, that is justifiable. But yes, wow, there are other things happening in the world that are not getting the attention they should. There are roughly 1 million Uyghur Muslims who are, you know, living in effectively concentration camps in China. And there's coverage of it, but it's not generating the same kind of outrage that you would normally expect. Look at the bomb in Beirut, that massive explosion. It did manage to get people's attention for a couple of days, and then it very quickly faded away again. But that country is still in crisis.
And once you're home,
the Syrian civil war hasn't been resolved. People are still dying. Schools and hospitals are still being bombed. And there are a lot of things and look at Russia. They just poisoned the leader of the opposition with Novichok, you know, and meanwhile, President Putin is now going to be president for life. So like, there's a lot of disturbing stuff happening in the world. And in any normal situation, I think Americans would be following it more closely.
Yeah. And
Americans are curious people, definitely. And they are hugely compassionate people for the most part as well. So I think this time will pass, and I think America will look outwards again. But for now, it makes sense that, of course, people are focused on what's going on in their backyard.
And I imagine too, that's got to be difficult for you as a journalist, because I felt that too, where sometimes you report and you want to hope for change and make something better, but that's always going to be that thing with what you do, that you can't snap your fingers and solve the problem.
No. And you know what? You realize at a certain point, part of what you need to survive in this industry for a long time is that you need to understand that you're riding a wave, okay? You're riding a wave, and sometimes you're on the story and it's the hot story and you're getting the goods and it's amazing. And sometimes you're on a story and it's a great story, but it just isn't getting the attention that you would like to see it get. And you just have to ride the wave. You can't change it. There are huge dynamics at play here. And somebody said to me, I was frustrated a while back, and I can't remember what story it was that I really wanted to see get more attention than it did. And they said, listen, well, you were winning all those awards in the Syrian civil war when it was such a big story. I think there was probably some guy in Mexico getting shot at every other day doing incredible work, and nobody was paying attention because Mexico wasn't a big story in that moment. Yeah. And so you do have to keep fighting for the stories you believe in and trying to get them their inch of coverage, but also understand that like you can't fight what people are interested in or drawn to at any given time.
Yeah, that's what's so frustrating, because, you know, the book was, you know, the education of a journalist. I said it was the education of a reader, you know what I mean? Because I feel like I didn't know a lot about the intricate details of a lot of this stuff, or, you know, sometimes it's hard to follow for the average person, I suppose.
I think it is. And you know what, I mean, Stacey, for me with this book, like, I did not write this book for a bunch of snotty intellectuals to be like, well, I think, you know, no, I wrote this book for people who, yes, find Syria totally complicated and baffling, and hopefully still will read it and be like, oh, but I can relate to this because I'm a woman too, and I know how I feel, or I'm a man as well, and I know how I feel, you know. Yeah. I want people to relate to this book on a human level because they're gripping stories.
Absolutely.
Forget the geopolitics, okay? You know, that's not what I'm here to deliver.
But you made it, in your storytelling, you made it very easy to understand and break it down.
Well, that's mission accomplished.
Yeah, it was, and speaking, well, as I've kept you so long, but I just want to ask you in terms of advice for other young journalists who want to follow in your footsteps. What would you say? I don't know if it involves how many pairs of underwear to bring on a trip or not. But
don't forget your underwear when you're covering a tsunami. Other piece of it. So the first piece of advice I always say is, if you're a picky eater, find another job because you'll starve. Okay. Once you're on your third sheep's eyeball, like, you know, you just, yeah. So, but no, in all seriousness, this work, if you really want to do the international stuff and particularly the conflict stuff, you have to want it so badly, because it involves a lot of sacrifice, both in terms of like, you know, your phone goes off at 3 a.m. and it's like, oh yeah, no, you're not going to your kid's school play tomorrow. You're getting on a plane to Iraq.
Yeah.
And in terms of, you know, you miss endless weddings and parties and whatever, you just have to be willing to let go of a lot of that stuff. But also it's really hard emotionally to keep up the pace. It is very stressful. It is very tiring. And it is dangerous.
Yeah.
So it has to be a passion. That's what and if the passion is there and that is really what you want to do, then don't accept anything else. Yeah. And I get all these young people, oh, but I've been working on the desk and it's not going. I'm like, listen, I did 2 years on the overnight assignment desk at Fox. Okay. There is no lower rung on the totem pole. Okay. Like that's it. And I was in a basement and I was depressed and I was working overnights. At the end of the day, if you're that determined, if you have the fire in your belly, if you have the passion for it, if that's what you love, you'll do it. You'll make it happen.
But it's not going to happen. You know, it can't go 0 to 1.
It's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
You know, and the worst thing we do is tell kids when they graduate from college that the world's your oyster. It's like, no, it's actually really not. And the next few years of your life are really going to be sort of sucky.
Yeah.
I hate to say it.
But a lot of oysters.
Yeah, exactly. Get shocking.
But it's kind of something you even said, the privilege of witnessing history comes at a price. You know,
yeah,
it really does. But well, this is amazing. It's funny if this book's going to become a movie. Perhaps you could play yourself, but it's interesting though how your nickname was Khaleesi, because I think one of your
from
producers,
my good friend Ben Plesser. Yeah,
but
Mother
also,
of Dragons.
Yeah, or Carrie from Homeland. That's what I kept thinking too the other day as I was watching.
And I actually went to college with Claire Danes, and in fact, I'm sending her my book because I'm like, you know, if it did get made into a series, you should blame me.
She can. Well, it was a phenomenal book. It's going to do very well.
Thank you.
It already has. And I just thank you so much for giving me of your time and talking about this, because I admire you from afar for sure for many, many years. So
well, I'm really so grateful to you for having me on, and the fact that you like the book and that you're really being sincere about it. There is no greater feeling than knowing that something, because it's kind of vulnerable. You're like, I put myself out there. And when you feel that the story resonates with someone or the people and places like that, for me it's the juice, as we say.
The juice. I love it. And you got the juice. So, well, thank you, Clarissa. And again,
thank you.
The book is On All Fronts, The Education of a Journalist. Now, to learn more, just visit thewomenseye.com. There you will also find our book, 20 Women Changemakers. And lastly, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Stacey Gualandi. This is the Women's Eye Podcast. Just remember, it's the world as we see it.